when you try to go fast and build things that haven't been done previously. Tire factory had been done previously, but a long time ago, and the institutional knowledge had been lost. For cannabis, it was brand new. So when you do things for the first time, you're gonna make mistakes, and you need to correct those mistakes, and that results in change orders and further delays. And understanding how those delays impact the overall timeline is pretty cool, and also managing the costs and the contractors around that is very good.
Welcome to $1 Billion Projects, the only podcast sharing lessons from thought leaders who work in mining, oil and gas, and all other industrial verticals, where the projects have budgets in the millions and sometimes billions of dollars. I'm Wes Sessenwein, founder and CEO of Patient, and I'll be your host as we explore insights and challenges from the projects that we consider to be the backbone of our economy. Now let's get started. Today we have Olivier joining us. Olivier, would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Wes. So I'm Olivier. I'm an engineer, a project manager, a factory manager, and an entrepreneur. I was the COO of Canopy Growth, a very large or the largest cannabis producer. I've worked in various countries, including China, where I was the project manager of the world's largest tire factory. They are building it. And I've done various things in the past, mostly in manufacturing, operations, and building companies.
Thanks for joining us today. I would love to understand a little bit about the path, maybe from education and training into the world of, project management, operation management. How was that journey for you? What did it look like?
So I was born and raised in France, did high school in the US, and then I went to Canada to study engineering. And while I was in Montreal, I decided to take a break and get a manufacturing job in Asia, in Thailand. While I was in Thailand, I had the opportunity to go to China and got really interested in how quickly the country was changing and the opportunities to help build the infrastructure there. And I realized that there were opportunities for engineers to help factories basically build manufacturing. So upon graduation, I joined Michelin, the tire maker, because they had plans to expand in Asia and in China and needed folks to help. So after a short stint in Europe, getting trained on the technology and the industrial engineering side of things, I was sent to China, northeastern part of China, to lead the construction of a new factory. And this was a big adventure, and I was fortunate enough to lead the construction of the factory. Following this experience, I went back to Europe, where I became the general manager of a subsidiary of Michelin, did an MBA in the US, and then I came back to Canada. And after a short stint as a management consultant, I joined the cannabis industry right at the beginning. And that was shortly after cannabis had been legalized for medical purposes. And then I joined a startup called Tweed that eventually became the world's largest cannabis company under the name Canopy Growth. And the timing was fortunate, was lucky because Justin Trudeau got elected and decided to legalize cannabis for recreational purposes. And that led to Canopy Growth having to build very, very quickly a lot of capacity across Canada first, in every province, and then across Europe and in the US as well. So I was fortunate to be the CEO in charge of building all those large-scale greenhouses, indoor facilities, processing facilities to supply cannabis in a short time to the Canadian and European and US customers as well.
So when I think of your background, the word pioneering comes to mind. And so there's so many areas I want to double tap there, but let's start with you get training from Michelin in Europe, and then you're dispatched out to China to construct the world's largest tire manufacturing facility. I can think of about 1,000 things that would be challenging there, let alone like the construction and but you're in a new environment, new language, probably different norms in terms of contracting. What was that experience like? When did you get involved with the project, and what was the experience like?
It was a challenging environment for many reasons. One is the language, not being able to understand. I don't speak Mandarin, so not being able to understand a lot of the local contractors and being able to interact, not being able to interact and speak with them directly was a challenge. But at the same time, what I discover over there is the project management methodology, the contracts, the way you schedule tends to be standardized for large scale projects across the world. And in China, you find high quality contractors, suppliers that know those methodology, number one. And then number two, a lot of the equipment that we installed was actually coming from either North America or Europe. So we were dealing with stakeholders who spoke the same language and had to use the same methodology. I thought the challenge was really around civil engineering, earth moving, the building, like local things rather than the equipment. Because then there was a lot of cultural differences and language differences. That resulted in having to rely on my team, so building probably a bigger project team that I would have had otherwise. And so relying on this team was key. And it was a bit of a challenge because the local team that we hired didn't have the expertise in building, a tire factory. So I had some experts from Europe that had to fly in on a regular basis, so dealt with, try to transfer knowledge from their end to the new local Chinese team that would then manage the subcontractors and service providers locally. So a whole bunch of issues, but at the end, we managed.
Okay, great. So I don't know what's involved in building a tire factory. Like from a process perspective, where does the first input and what's the output when you're building a tire?
So the process is you build a pretty large warehouse basically that is has air conditioning and you have to bring a lot of utilities because some of the equipment uses a lot of power. The complication is in the foundation of the machines that come inside the factory, and some machines like large-scale extruders to produce different type of rubbers have fairly complex foundations and concrete piling and so on. So there are complications around that. Like the outside of the building is a fairly standard box, rectangular box. Complication is in the ground and then having all the utilities. For us, the challenge in China, and this somewhat the same challenge that I faced in building the cannabis infrastructure, was really speed. Because we had to be ready quickly. As a result, we had to accelerate the engineering studies, the permitting process, to a point where suppliers weren't used to moving so quickly. And there was a need to do many things in parallel. And that led to inevitably changes as we went along. So managing the change orders after from the contractual standpoint became something critical. Because when you try to go fast and build things that haven't been done previously, or for tire factory had been done previously, but a long time ago, and the institutional knowledge had been lost. For cannabis, it was brand new. So when you do things for the first time, you're going to make mistakes and you need to correct those mistakes, and that results in change orders and further delays. And understanding how those delays impact the overall timeline is critical, and also managing the costs and the contractors around that is very critical.
Schedule is a foundational element when you get into an agreement between client and contractor. And, sometimes that schedule needs to change. And when it compresses, it kind of opens a door to discussion around change and additional cost. And how do you think about optimizing that relationship such that it truly ends up being like a win-win for both, and not just an opportunity for the contractor to earn an outsized take on the project?
The challenge is, once you lock your contractor in the contract, there's a transfer of knowledge to the contractor, and the contractor becomes embedded on site, and then they get leverage when the change order comes, and therefore they can either overcharge or accept the change order but not deliver exactly on the timeline. So it was really a struggle. I think one way I was able to deal with it is to have some buffer in my timeline. I knew that there were going to be change orders because I knew some of the processes were not buttoned down when we started the construction of the building, for example. So I had a bit of a buffer there in order to account for the uncertainty and the changes. That was one way to deal with it. The other way that I try to prevent the contractor from taking advantage of the change orders was to have a tight project team that would actually spend the hours looking at the building, looking at the hours, and doing on-site audits to ensure that we weren't taking advantage of. Number two. And then number three, I had some buffering in the budget as well. That was there because I knew that inevitably, if you change the plan midway, there's going to be cost overrun. But I don't think there's a magic bullet. The way to resolve the problem is to slow down from the start and have like very detailed engineering studies completed before you start your RFP, your RFQs and selecting your contractors. But sometimes in new industries or in new geographies, like being in China, building cannabis, you don't have the luxury of time. So you have to go fast. So you need to take that into account in your budget, that into account in your timeline, and reinforce your project team so that you have more people on your end, like watching over what the contractors is doing.
My career has largely been spent on the contractor side of the table. So I'm familiar with what good looks like in terms of client-contractor relationship and some of the ceremonies that you can go through at the beginning of a project to make sure that you get off or optimize for a successful future together. It could be like a high-quality kickoff meeting. It could be team bonding and opening the communication channels between the two project teams on contractor and owner side. It could be having key executive stakeholders go out for a supper or, go to family events together, whatever it might be that helps tie the two teams together to achieve a common success. There are various permutations exist of that, but I wonder, in China, for example, was there anything that you did to set the project up for success with the various stakeholders at the front end that would be different from what you would have done in Europe or in North America?
I mean, those are all good points. I think over there were like cultural norms that were different, for sure, from the one I've experienced in North America. And you were expected to, wine and dine with your contractors and sing karaoke and have like events, social events. You were expected to participate in those social events to a greater extent you did in North America.
That's interesting.
What I've experienced also is, specifically in China, my experience, though, which may not be the experience of everybody, is that the personal relationship mattered much more than the contract itself. Developing that personal relationship, whereas my experience with dealing with contractors in North America was much more about what was written in the contract, and the expectations were clearer from the contractual standpoint. So understanding that is critical when you're operating the environment. I think it's important that as the project manager, you sort of adapt yourself to the local environment rather than the other way around. But have certain requirements in terms of clarity and transparency on the budget, clarity and transparency on the timeline, and then the deliverables that needs to be set no matter what. I wish there was a clear a clear answer. I think at the end of the day, there's like a bunch of best practices that apply no matter what you build, no matter where you are. And then there are like local differences that sort of go on top that you need to be aware of. And as the client, you need to follow in order to be successful in what you're doing.
So did you go out and sing karaoke?
No. I became quite good. Quite good at it. I learned a few songs in Mandarin, so I could sing that. And yeah.
Nice. Very cool.
There was a challenge for me is I needed an interpreter, and this is not something I had really experienced prior when Spain for Michelin and in Germany as well, and those countries I was able to learn the language and speak the language, so I could interact directly in the language of the contractor. But over there, I had to go through an interpreter, and that makes that's yet another hurdle. Number one, you go through someone to interact, and number two, you're not able to pick up on social cues or on conversations that your team may have with the other team or they may have together. It's harder to read situations and people when you don't understand the language.
Last question here. I'm interested in how you would describe the scale of that project. Square feet, number of piles, amount of tradespeople on site, the spend. How would you?
In China, those were, I can't remember exactly, but 500,000 square feet building, something around that. When I was doing the large scale greenhouses and indoor facilities in Canada for cannabis, it was, anywhere from 250,000 square feet to 1 million square feet greenhouses. So those are large buildings. Very large buildings. In case of the tires, the value is in the equipment rather than in the building. So those are very expensive piece of machinery, highly automated, lots of robots, lots of big extruders. You cure tires in very large ovens. So the CapEx was really about the equipment itself that you buy from third party that you need to install. And then you have just a few vendors because they're very specialized equipment. Whereas when I did with the cannabis, the bulk of the equipment of the CapEx was really in the building itself, greenhouses, indoor cultivation facilities. So there was mostly in the building and the utilities for which you have more vendors, basically. So you're able to have competitive process to source the equipment. And then if the vendor is not suitable, then you can, to some extent, change the vendors after. Or there's a replacement opportunity to it, which keeps everybody a little bit more honest, maybe, and on their toes. So the relationship with your contractors really depend to some extent on how unique and exclusive they are to you. And I would, argue that the less contractors you have to choose from, the more power they have, and then the more difficult the relationship can become if there are problems.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to understand that and recognize that so that you can sort of manage the relationship accordingly.
Yeah. I've had a lot of experience in that area in dealing with specialty fireproofing products and NGL and LNG facilities where it's almost like a specialty blue paint that only one or two contractors in North America have the license to apply. And you got to make sure that you're attracting them and retaining them at the job site. It's a little bit different than if you need like a heavy equipment contractor when you might be able to find a handful of them around. So awesome. I want to pull on the string of, the level of engineering. We always want it done for all the stakeholders at the table, contractor and owner alike. This is where, it sounds like you were pioneering really at the time. The legalization of recreational cannabis led to a rush of needing to get production capacity online and start up, scale up, and then what was eventually like a publicly traded company. What did that journey look like for you?
It was very intense. You needed to be very creative because we were borrowing technologies and equipment from other industries. So from the horticultural or agricultural industry for, in order to grow cannabis and harvest cannabis, floral industry, greenhouses. But from the processing standpoint, we had to do some extraction of oil, for example. So we went into the essential oil, the providers of equipment for, doing essential oils and perfumes. And then when we started making cannabis infused gummies, we looked into the food industry. So there was a lot of borrowing technologies and equipment from various industries that sort of was critical to success. I had to accept that I didn't have the answer to all the pieces of the equipment when we were starting the process of designing the facility, for example. And that's a little bit unusual. Like typically, you built a building, a facility, and the utilities around a manufacturing process. So first you start with the machine. Those are the machinery. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and then you put a conveyor, that's going to move the goods from, the various steps, and there can be pipes, for a continuous process. And then, okay, your needs for utilities. So you design the utilities, and then, you put the envelope or the building around the equipment and the utilities. And that's the way to design and engineer, an industrial project or a large scale factory. In this case, we didn't have all the answers. We knew that we had to deliver an end product at the date of legalization for recreational purposes. So I knew the end date, but I didn't have all the answers. So the way I went around it is I asked the civil engineers, to design a factory with blank space in it, blank rooms. And I knew that roughly I was going to be able, I was going to put a piece of equipment in there with roughly the utilities needed, the electrical, the compressed air, the gas, the hot water, the cold water, the utilities were going there roughly. And they would start designing with this. And then after, when I had selected the equipment, I would, come back and ask them to put the equipment in the AutoCAD and design or refine all the calculation. And that resulted in a lot of changes on the utilities front, for example, that led to many change orders, obviously. But at least from the building standpoint, we had built enough space, so the change orders from the building were limited. And that's important because you start with the building, right? You start with the foundation, with the piling, with the preparing the ground. So that's the first thing you start. So if you have to change that after, it's difficult. And your permitting is linked to the building.
I'd love to tie this to the business outcome. Why, by asking this question, why wouldn't you just have waited until you chose all the technology in the manufacturing process and had a better rounded view of what you would need where before starting the design and then ultimately hiring the client? Why would
the reason is time. There was a pressure to be first to market. There's a new industry. Cannabis was getting legalized. Canadian government had decided that, provided dates. So we knew that we had to be ready for legalization. We knew that we wanted to be first in market. So there was a time pressure. If we took our time and designed everything, then someone else was going to supply the market and grab market share and become dominant. So it was really a time to market that was critical. When I was in China, it was also a time to market. China was opening up. There was a growing middle class that needed cars. If you have more cars for the growing middle class, you have more tires, and therefore you want to be first to market. And so it's the same sort of idea. Sometimes you have, for new markets, for new industries, it's either a new industry, a new product, or a new market. You want to be first because the first takes it all. and establish it's easier to sales when you're the only supplier in a given market. And so you have to go fast, and you have to accept that going fast implies making mistakes and overpaying for certain services. And contractors, unfortunately, know that. They know that you're in a rush, so they'll take advantage of that to some extent. But being first to market is critical often. And even today, there are new industries like electric cars, for example, is an industry where you see in the news this rush to build factories for batteries, to build new factories to assemble the electric cars, and so on. This is an example of a new industry where I'm sure that the players in this industry face the same sort of challenges that I faced on my own.
Let's talk about that. You've got design at, I don't know, let's say 50%. The investment decision is made. What's the scale of what you're trying to accomplish in what period of time? And how did you go about breaking ground? How did you choose contractors, contract type? How did you think about that?
A few things happened. Like the scales was hundreds of millions of dollars contract for each facility, 100 million plus. The way that I suggested was to try to design things in a modular fashion. Like if you need to build a big production site, you can design it to be big, but you don't necessarily need to build the whole thing right away. And so you can leave room for add-ons later on. So that was a way to sort of handle the uncertainty as well. And then the process to select the contractors and so on was relatively the same. I mean, we bid, request for pricing, contractors were selected using standard processes where procurement was involved, obviously. And then they had, their standard contracts and so on. Just try to standardize as much as possible with, the understanding that the scope wasn't like completely buttoned down or buttoned up, and they were so there was attention in the contracts on things like change orders, number one, and then like time and material as well was like carefully negotiated up front, because I knew that this was going to come. I knew that there will be many change orders, and then I knew that in many cases the contractors were going to ask for the proposed time and material arrangement, and time and material tends to be can become very expensive if not properly managed.
So you started in fixed price, or you started the whole project?
Yeah, we started in fixed price as much as possible. Yes,
it's my experience that as a contractor that you want to, in a lot of cases, break free of lump sum and go to the T&M model, and so you become expert at conveying the reasons for doing that.
The pushback I received on the fixed price was that they didn't have enough information. They didn't have the full engineering package in order to properly quote. Okay, so that was the pushback. The contractor wanted to have a fixed price with a plus or minus 10, 15, 20%. So which is not a fixed price basically. So that was a challenge, and I understood that it was difficult for them to quote. So what happened is some contractors actually didn't want to take those projects on because they didn't have all the information to do a fixed price, and they felt that they were working with a time pressure they were not going to be able to respond to that. But other contractors on the other sides are comfortable with that because they like the pressure, they like the challenge as well of building a new industry. For them, those are showcases that they can sort of bring their team around and show their other clients or their prospects on their ability to take on like more difficult projects. Again, there's no perfect answer to this. Like the perfect answer is slow down and take your time, but then you're missing your commercial window by doing this. So you have to agree that there's going to be change orders, there's going to be time and material, and then that the fixed price that you get quoted on is not necessarily going to be the best price you can get because you don't have time basically to have many contractor bid, because you don't have all the drawings and engineering package completely buttoned up.
So did you decide to flip to time and material?
I think what happened in some of the cases is that we went with fixed price, and then we had a lot of change orders, and some of the change orders ended up being on time and material after, unfortunately. I try to avoid it as much as possible, but sometimes it's not possible.
Got it. So you're the CEO of the business with a purview over hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of probably in parallel construction projects in various locations. I'm interested in what level of detail you got in, or like what level of oversight you had on a day-to-day or week to week, what level of detail that you found yourself.
It all depends on your team. I think you want to have especially for a big CapEx project, you need to have a good understanding. I think it's important for the management and the CEO to have a good understanding of the technical scope so that the CEO can recruit a good project manager when reviewing the progress with the project manager or managers, because there are many. Then we can have a good deep conversation and understand the challenges and hold the project manager accountable, and then the project manager holds his team and the contractors and suppliers accountable as well. So there's a need, in my view, especially in industrial and manufacturing companies, to have CEOs that have a deep technical expertise, engineering expertise, and understanding of the reality of building those projects. So for me, because I have done it before, I was in China as project manager. It was sort of easy to keep an understanding of what was going on, and I had prior experience to tell me, if something was not right. I had a nose for it. I could see the problems better. But the challenge is because you have so many other things to manage, you don't have time to, be present. So you rely on your team and recruiting a team and having the structure in place to understand, through reporting and to budgeting and to progress updates, to understand when the situation is not going according to plan, and how to pressure and react to that is critical. Those various projects, it was definitely a challenge. I think certain tools like project management tool, certain project management methodology with the work breakdown structure and the work package with clear deliverables and budgets allocated to each package help manage better, and also help flag when there are slippage, delays, or budget overruns right away, before it's too late. I think one of the challenges I had definitely in understanding where the issues were is from the contractor standpoint, they don't provide a good clear view of where they stand in terms of the advancement, compared with the timeline, and also with the budget and charging the cost until they submit an invoice, basically. And when you get the invoice, it's too late already. So there's a bit of a lag. And then when you get the invoice, and the invoice is high, it takes even more time to ask questions and get answers. And in the meantime, because you're in a fast-moving project with a lot of workers on site, things keep going. So if you don't stay on top, it's easy to end up in a situation where you just have to pay, and where you don't manage as effectively as you could.
That is challenging. And now there's prompt payment legislation in place and construction projects that you don't have a choice. If you don't, come forward on a specific form to indicate the reason that you're disputing it, within 14 days, you're obligated to pay that invoice. And then it becomes super challenging. So a theme that I've had across many of these podcasts on scales or projects that were of scale similar or larger to the projects that you were building. One of them was a large 48-inch pipeline from Western Canada all the way out to the coast, and then another was a large copper mining operation, where they talked about the volume of change that would be happening would start to build up, where you would have change order logs that were sometimes hundreds of pages long. And there's a level of oversight required to be comfortable in approving the change technically and approving the cost. And then when it starts to pile up, you really get, as an owner or somebody approving it, you get set back on your heels. Have you been there? And how do you help your team work through a backlog like that, such that you're paying for what you should be, and the business is getting the outcome that they should be as well?
Yeah, I mean, like what you describe is gives me a strong sense of déjà vu. I think what happens is you get change orders, and in order to approve the change orders, you need time to review them, and you don't have that time. You have limited resources, and then your contractor has limited resources to answer the question. So there comes a moment where you don't have enough resources to check the invoices that you've been asked to pay, and to approve the change orders that you need in order to keep the project going. And therefore, you end up in a situation where you select which invoice you're going to dig and which invoice you're not going to dig, and then select which change order you want to understand in detail and challenge, and which one you don't want. And so you can do prioritization based on the dollar amount or the impact. For me, it was mostly based on the impact on the overall schedule. That was the most important thing, was the impact on the schedule. But you sort of, I think it's important to think about what you want to challenge, what do you want to dig, and what do you want to let go. And you probably want to dig on the stuff that costs the most, or impacts the budget the most, or sends the strongest message to the contractor, insofar as saying, look, I'm not going to let this pass. I want to have clear answers and so on. But I think the challenge I had in the various projects in the various countries where I operated is contractors were very reluctant to give transparency on their true cost or where they were at in the progress, and either because they didn't want us to know, or just they didn't know themselves, because contractors often rely on other contractors as well, sub-trades, and the sub-trades don't provide the information themselves, or there isn't a platform or a structure, solution in place to sort of aggregate all the information and present it to the client in an effective way. So it was really, I think, and this is what something that Pace Shepherds is obviously providing today, which I think it's a need. But for me, it definitely, back to your question, it came back to a point where there were so many change orders and so many invoices to pay that it wasn't possible to deal with all of them with the level of detail that was necessary. So it was about prioritizing. Okay, which one do I want to dig? Which one do I want to challenge? And what is that going to do for what was important for me at the time, which was timeline of a delivery, compliance, and with regulations and so on, and then budget.
Okay, I'm interested in your perspective. Thanks for sharing. I'm interested in your perspective in this one area. So before starting Pace Shepherd, was leading a portfolio of large projects where I would have day-to-day oversight, dozens, if not 100 different types of contractors, some alike, some not. So a very similar situation where I wasn't able to, deploy the amount of time, and the team wasn't able to allocate the time to every single change order that would come in. But ultimately, as a contractor, I was responsible to my client at the end of the day. And so what I found was that the contractors that on the first change order are able to do your job for you in validating on the change order that the change is acceptable, tend to have less scrutiny over time. And so the investment in that first change order is so important as a contractor. And that could mean, including the drawing packages, well annotated, showing the change, breaking down the cost, and providing the case such that, I could read it and say, hey, this makes a lot of sense. It seems reasonable. They've done my job for me. approved. And then everything that came after was just more soothing than others. And so if you were talking to a contractor, telling them what you would love to see on change orders, how would you describe it? And would that make it a competitive advantage in your view for that contractor?
It's a good point. I mean, the signaling is really important at the beginning, especially of the relationship. You want to clearly indicate what your expectations are from the contractor in terms of the level of documentation and details and transparency that they need to provide. And especially at the beginning, like make sure that you follow through on the analysis so that the contractor feels that, you know, the work on their end was worth doing. After. So I think like it's a good point. Like I wish I, did it more, obviously. But you want to start with on the right footing from the start, and then after, if they provide the information, then there's trust, and then you can sort of relax the amount of oversight and time and energy that you spend on reviewing the change orders, on reviewing the invoices, and so on. I don't know though if I guess depending on the contractor, that this stays good over time, or you need a refresher once in a while, probably. I think another way to go about it is to use a general contractor, like a GC that does that, who does it for you for a fee, presumably. And so you hire a GC, the GC hire the various trades and contractors, the utilities, and so on. And so you only have one person to deal with. But then there's a downside to it, is there's a cost. And then now you pay the GC a percentage of the overall project. For me, the challenge with having GCs is they have no domain expertise. So it's hard to have a GC because they didn't really understand the industry, because it was a new industry. So there wasn't like this option wasn't fully available.
Olivier, I could go on for hours here. I would love to ask like one question in closing is like, through your career managing the impressive deployment of capital in different areas of the world, what's one lesson learned in this space that you've had carry forward?
I think for me, the key lessons is that the fundamentals of managing a business, managing a project, managing CapEx expenditure, the fundamentals are the same, regardless of the industry and regardless of the maturity of the industry. A young industry, an established industry, you still need a good budget. You still need a good project team. You still need a good contract. Still need a good cadence with your contractors. You still need details in your change order, in your invoices, and so on. Like fundamentals remain the same, no matter what industry you're in, what stage, or what country even. It's really important to stick with the fundamentals and have like the right processes in place and the right people to implement those processes when managing large CapEx projects like the one we've discussed. So that's like really the key thing is like we tend to think, oh, it's new, it's unique, it's different, I'm going to do it differently or with less rigor. But at the end, it's just you still need to apply the same tools, processes, unless you'll end up paying more, basically, and being late on delivery. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Olivier, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit with me today. Incredible career. I'm really happy that you got to share some of your story, and love to have you back in the future.
You bet. Thank you so much, Wes.